People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Año 1940. Un pueblo cualquiera de la meseta castellana. El espíritu de la colmena. Una visión sensitiva y poética del mundo de los niños y de su aislamiento en el interior de la familia y la sociedad. El espíritu de la colmena.
Buenos días, don José.
Buenos días, don José.
Muy bien. Pobre don José. ¿Quién lo ha puesto así?
El espíritu de la colmena. Con Fernando Fernán Gómez, Teresa Gimpera y las niñas Ana Torrent e Isabel Tellería. El espíritu de la colmena. Un canto a la imaginación, a la fantasía en una historia auténtica. Los porqués de una niña, su querer saber, sus primeras preguntas y sus primeras respuestas.
Cuéntame lo que me ibas a contar. La película. Ahora no, mañana. Porque el monstruo mata a la niña y porque le matan luego a él.
Ana.
El espíritu de la colmena. Una película donde se combinan maravillosamente la visión del universo infantil con la delicada visualización poética del mundo de los sueños. El espíritu de la colmena. Un film donde lo macabro y lo delicado se funden en unas imágenes de gran belleza.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Heather Drain.
Hello.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Robert Bellissimo.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me back.
We are kicking off an August of art films as we look at Victor Erice's 1973 film, The Spirit of the Beehive. The film stars Ana Torrent as Ana, a 5-year-old who lives with her older sister, Isabel, her mother, and her distant father in a palatial estate. When the film Frankenstein comes to their little Castilian town, Ana becomes fascinated by the creature killing little Maria. She begins to deal with death in the world after this. There's a lot more to this film, and we plan on spoiling all of it. You have been warned. So, Heather, when was the first time you saw The Spirit of the Beehive, and what did you think?
The first time I got to actually sit down and watch this film was in preparation for this recording, because when you had mentioned your schedule, I was like, that's one I've always wanted to see. I've heard of it, of course. I was not disappointed. Without going into many details, because I know we're about to dive into it, I will say this film was I would consider it like a gentle piece of cinema about a very harsh world. And that's how it strikes me.
And Robert, how about yourself?
Yeah, same with Heather. This was a first time for me. I guess I'm doing all the Bees this year, Mike, because we did Valley of the Bees and now Spirit of the Beehive. So I took all the bee-related films. And so, yeah, this was the first time for me. I hadn't even heard of it until I saw your list that you were planning for the year. And I haven't heard of the filmmaker. Spanish cinema in general is a bit of a blind spot for me. I've got to do something about that. Outside of Buñuel, I probably don't know a lot of Spanish films. So it was a first for me, and I watched it. The first time I didn't take to it right away. And I thought, why? I don't know, because it seemed like something I'd be much more interested in. And then I was like, I got to dive into it again because I must be missing something. And when I watched it again, I was like, yeah, I could see why when I first saw it, I just wasn't in the right mindset for it because it's not a film that you can watch like most films. I think I put it on when I was maybe in the mood to just consume as opposed to experience something much more challenging. And I think a lot of stuff went over my head. And then obviously reading more about the film, there was some great special features on the Criterion channel where Erice and the writers and the producers talk about it, which helped me see a lot more insight into it. What I like so much about the film is nothing is obvious. It really leaves you thinking about what is this girl looking at a lot of the time? What is she thinking? Why is she so drawn to this Frankenstein? The connection with the Spanish Civil War. So it's a tough watch in a good way. But yeah, the second time I liked it a lot more. So I'm looking forward to diving in deeper.
Yeah, this was also a first time watch for me. I had been aware of this film for probably 20 some years. It's just got such an interesting title, and I don't remember where I first heard it or if I came across it, maybe like Facets was putting it out on VHS or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, it's just always been out there and always been something that I've wanted to check out. And so much of this show is me kicking my own ass and making myself watch things. So, and I'm almost always a better person for it, like finally seeing The Conformist, finally seeing this, finally seeing, more Yoshida films, just like, yes, bring it on. And this one did not disappoint whatsoever. It is ironic because I don't know that much about Spanish cinema either, not nearly as much as I would like to, only to find out that Ana Torrent actually is in a movie that I like a lot and have seen a few times, even talked about it on Chris Dashew's show, The Culture Cast, available at weirdingwaymedia.com, talking about the film Thesis. She was the main character in that, which is a great Spanish horror film. If people haven't seen that one, I highly recommend it. And that was however many years later. I want to say it was 96. So little Ana all grown up. But yeah, I love Ana that she is, like you said, she's kind of a blank slate, just this little girl with these big, big brown eyes, and just her taking in the world and her reaction to things. She's not a professional actress at this point. She admitted publicly, she's like, yeah, no, I was just reacting against things. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how movies worked. I wasn't able to take direction. She didn't know when they were calling her another name at first, what they were talking about. So they ended up just calling her Ana. And I think they did the same thing for her sister as well. Just made it a lot easier. In fact, the first few films that Ana Torrent was in, her character's name is Ana because it's just a lot easier. It's kind of like Jackie Chan movies, right? Just call him Jackie. But yeah, just like you said, there's so many pieces and parts to this. And I mean, even just the title, The Spirit of the Beehive. Yes, there are beehives in here, and there's talk about spirits versus ghosts, which is interesting. But also, when you think about it, the spirit of the beehive, we don't tend to use, or I don't tend to use here in the US, I don't tend to use the word spirit too often. But if I were to use ghost, if I were to call this the ghost of the beehive or the specter of the beehive, it's very Phantom of the Opera. Is it something haunting the beehive, or is it just this creature? Because the first time you see Ana's father, he's in that big beekeeper outfit. It's probably one of the scarier images of the entire film, I would say.
The whole thing with the spirit versus ghost, because we see the little girls and her sister, after seeing Frankenstein, talking about, oh no, that's not a ghost, it's a spirit. And my first thought was like, I've always thought they were one and the same, because you read about there was that sort of fascinating sort of seance. People, I'm sure, still do seances now, but that was like a big cultural fad in America in the 1920s, calling the spirits. But what are spirits in that? Ghosts. You're calling the dead. Yeah. And the whole alliteration of the title is so mysterious. It's like the title itself is a hint to like the ride you're in, because this film is beautifully obtuse in some ways. And Roberto, I like a film that gives me room to be like, the filmmaker telegraphs every single thing. Where's the magic in that? Where's the mystery? And you're also treating your viewers like they're dumb. I think sometimes if you do that too much. And I love that. There's a lot of room, a lot of breathing room in this film.
You're not always sure if the English translation is exactly what the people are saying, but Erice and others were referring to Frankenstein. Later on, the gorilla fighter, the soldier that comes into that barn near where they live. And they refer to them as like phantom characters, so that it's phantom, ghosts, spirits. Is there a difference? And what does it all mean? And I think the fact that Anna has that scene where she's asking her mother, are her spirits good or bad, is something that she can't quite figure out. And that's what fascinates me, is what is drawing her to Frankenstein in this film. We don't really know. There's only suggestions, and so you have to come up with your own answers. But naturally, this coming right off the Civil War, Franco is taken over in this small town in Spain, and Erice was saying basically that watching Frankenstein basically gave birth to their imagination, so to speak, that everything that they had experienced thus far has been people who are mute, people who are talking, who are sad, who are distant. We see that this marriage is with their parents, that they don't even talk. This is the first time they've seen a movie. They're likely haven't, I don't know what school. No, we do see them at schools. But this has really sparked their imagination. So it's that bleak reality giving birth to one's imagination. And then from a child, what does that bring out? And there's so much. It's so layered and so ambiguous that really people have to come up with their own things. But I think ultimately accept the mystery of it. It's unexplainable. It's hard to talk about in some ways.
One thing that I thought was so captivating in this film is how quiet this film is. This is one of the most quiet films of the sound era. Because even with there's dialogue, it's almost always whispered. It's a very whispery movie. And you touched upon this, and I love this, is that the adults in this universe that was obviously based in history in real life carry themselves. They're almost like ghosts themselves. They have this, even the way they move, they have of heavy grief. They themselves have been muted because they've had to deal with destruction and trauma and oncoming poverty. Ana still has this fire. It's like the film lights this little fire in her of a world beyond the drabness. Like the adults don't really, other than the teacher, the parents interact with the kids, but not much. Those kids are left to fend for themselves largely. And they're left to their own devices. Her sister, it doesn't look that much older than her, but I guess it's just old enough to where she's already displaying signs of having what I'll call the cynicism of the adult world, where Ana is still young enough where she has that purity of just being like, this is real. To me, it seems like the only other person seeing this film that still has that ability to have imagination is her father. And the housekeeper makes some comment to him while she's feeding the chickens about his head in the clouds, or don't keep your head in the clouds, something to that effect. And then later on, we hear while he's working in his little office and having his tea, we hear that dialogue from Frankenstein, where Victor Frankenstein is talking about that. And I think the reason a lot of children get into monster films is because it's a fantastique that can give you a comfort of dealing with real life horror. And I don't know if that's necessarily inside. Yeah. And that's the thing, because everything around her is, the landscape looks like Oklahoma in the summer. It is not pretty. Almost all the color except for the golden light that we see pour into the house, which is beautiful. But everything other than that is very drab, except for the honey light and that far off green mountain that father's grandfather called the mushroom garden. And that in the distance looks really fertile, but everything else just looks like the fertility has been sucked out and no place for whimsy. But a child needs whimsy. And it's, I think horror can be such a great way to cope with trauma, especially when you're young, because you're not stupid. You have an animal sense of something not being right, but you're still trying to make your way about it.
Yeah, so much of this film for me is all about trauma and just the way that we experience things and process things, because it feels like Isabel is not processing things very well at all, especially when she is choking the cat, which is one of the most horrific scenes for me. And then the cat scratches her to get away, and then she takes her finger with all that blood on it and then just starts rubbing it on her lips, doing lip gloss with the blood. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can kind of understand you're at that age where you're curious about makeup and these things, but at the same time, not blood, and not from, this injury that you got from nearly killing this cat. That is such an upsetting scene. And it's funny because so much of this movie is presaged in the opening credits, because you get those childhood drawings, very similar to another film that we've talked about on here, Death Game, with Colleen Camp and Sandra Locke. But you get these images, and it looks like they were drawn either by Ana or Isabel, and you get, the beehive with the mask, and it's funny because she draws the mask in green. So at first I was like, well, is that Frankenstein? But no. And then you see all the bees going into the house, but it's through that like wire mesh that he has set up. He has the bees actually living in the house in this protected way, which was very interesting. You get a picture of the cat as well. I mean, you get the two little girls. You get a few actually of the bee costume, which again, his head is like a triangle. When you see that, you get I think it's her mother with the letter writing and everything. So you get like all of these images right at the beginning that are going to come back, which is always clever, but you're also seeing what these things are interpreted by a child, and that, that's this whole movie.
I like what the father was saying about the beehive, because he almost like how Frankenstein becomes some sort of an escape of reality from reality for Anna. That seems to be his comfort, is the beehives. And he says when he showed somebody else the beehive, when they looked in and they saw all the chaos, that they were horrified, but yet he seems to be comfortable inside that chaos. And I suppose that is ultimately a metaphor for how they're feeling on the inside, nothing but chaos that's just bubbling and can't really come out. But that's what I took from the title of what the spirit of the beehive. So the spirits are the whole Frankenstein, the faith in Frankenstein that Anna has is some kind of a spirit. And they're inside this beehive, the honey coming in, the honey color with the bars on the glass window. It looks exactly like a beehive. That hope, that spirit is a good spirit, and not, that's what she's hearing and toying with and trying to figure out. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And we don't know. It's really hopeful, I would say. I think the fact that at the end she's still calling out to him, even after she imagined him grabbing her. I think it's a plea to be saved. I think that's how I saw it anyways. I don't know if the two of you saw that any differently, but.
Well, I love that she doesn't see what happens to the little girl in Frankenstein, and that becomes her question, and that she doesn't see it. Well, we don't see it either, because we cut away from that to the outside, but also the film itself was censored. So this whole thing of her living in Franco, Spain, 1940, I think, is when this was set. And then 1973 is when this comes out, being made probably in 72 or early 73. And we're still, 3 years away from Franco dying?
Yeah, he died in 75, so yeah.
So this whole reign is under Franco, though back in the 1940s, it was much more the whole fight between Franco's forces and the Republicans. So we get that the Maquis or the Republican soldier hiding out in the barn and everything. But just that, again, going back to trauma and just like all of those things that are happening outside of her realm, and it really feels like the whole family is hiding inside of that palatial estate where there's barely any furniture. I think they're on very hard times. Like when they're eating, you don't see big meals or anything. It looks like they're just eating soup. So I'm like, I don't think they're doing very well. I think they're just hanging on by a thread. Mom's got her letters, dad's got his beehives, and the girls are just trying to make do.
The whole scene, going back to that scene with the cat, that legit made me so squeamish. I'm like, what is wrong with you, kid? I don't know if that was Isabel's way of coping with trauma. It definitely happens with kids. But I guess there's a foreshadowing with the blood makeup novel. As much as I was into horror movies as a little one, I was never tempted to be like, ooh, there's some blood gloss or anything.
It kind of reminded me of Schindler's List. There's a scene where the Nazis are coming in to take some of the Jewish prisoners, and the Jewish people, the Jewish women are like, we have to look healthy. So they literally start pricking their fingers and using blood as blush. So I think that's blush, right? On your cheeks? Or rouge, yeah. So they're doing that in order to make themselves look more attractive to the Nazis so that they won't be killed first, which is a horrible thing. And there was one article I was reading talking about, because again, that has the famous girl in the red coat that you follow. You never really get to meet her, but you just see her fate. She's kind of in the background or foregrounded sometimes, seeing her. And I'm sorry if I'm getting this wrong, because I haven't seen Schindler's List since it was at the theaters, because I was so freaking traumatized by it. So I'm not about to pop it on and just watch it for a good time or anything. And
Haven't
I'm not going to
reviewed it
make
yet.
out. Yeah, I'm not going to make out in the theater while it's playing or anything.
Type out.
But, that's a child in wartime. And this whole movie is about children in wartime. And you get that whole idea of, what kind of innocence is being lost. So when you get an Isabel almost choking that cat, you're like, okay. Even Isabel pulls that. I mean, one of the things that I think is central to this movie is when she convinces Ana that she's dead and plays dead in that room. That, to me, it feels like Ana is a completely different person after that moment. And I don't know if I watched this correctly, but I think that when she's there with her sister and her sister's Isabel's on the ground and Ana's trying to wake her up or get her up, she leaves the room out of one doorway and kind of goes all the way around the compound and comes back. And it feels like she comes in a different doorway. And I swear it's almost like she's a different person at that point, because she just seems, again, very traumatized by that moment. It feels like she almost starts to get a little PTSD at that point. And then when her sister grabs her from behind, like a total horror jump scare, you're just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I was like, who is doing this? Because she's got those big gloves on. So you think it's a man grabbing her, but no, it's just her. Funny joke, right? I pretended that I was dead. Completely horrified Ana. I can't even imagine what she was going through.
It's interesting because in a sense, it plays on what kind of an imagination even the audience may have. Because when that was happening, I was like, oh, look how Frankenstein's behind you. And I'm thinking, even I started to believe that that maybe they're going into like magical realism. And then I'm like, oh, okay, it's a prank. But I think you're right. There is a real change in her right after that, because immediately after that is where she's watching her sister jump over the fire. And then it goes in slow motion and then freeze frame. And it keeps cutting back to her close up watching it, which goes back to what the Kuleshov effect, where, which Hitchcock would talk about endlessly about how it's used all the time, but he would use it endlessly in his films. You look at an image If it's a beautiful woman and a guy looking at her, then the audience, even if his expression is neutral, the audience knows, oh, he's checking her out. He thinks she's attractive or whatever. Looks at a food. He must be hungry. In this case, there's a lot of that, but it's never, like I said earlier, it's never obvious. She does have just a neutral expression. And even there, like you're looking at your sister jump over fire, but it's not just an obvious, oh, looking at a girl. Is she thinking, I want you to die because of what you did to me? I want you to burn now because you scared the hell out of me. It's even with the mushrooms earlier where the father's showing, okay, these are the bad mushrooms. If you eat them, you'll die. Don't go over to those mountains. And again, it's cutting to Anna looking at the mountains. And it's what we don't really know it's not obvious. It could be that she's thinking, is Frankenstein over there? Is the spirit over there? Is the spirit good? Is the spirit bad? The train, same thing. The train coming in. It's really interesting. I can't think of another film that sort of did something like this, and from a child's perspective, and how the imagination stimulates people and brings them into another reality that's existing only in their head. It's really original. I can't think of many films that did something like this. I guess people can see it in all kinds of ways, but I went back and just looked at some of those images. I'm like, what is she thinking here? It's really open-ended.
Well, the conversation changes because we have the two sisters talking to each other in bed. And now, after that moment, after that fire scene, after we see that freeze frame, we get them back in bed together again, or separate beds. And now Isabel is asking questions of Ana, and Ana just turns over and is like, nope, I'm not talking to you anymore. I'm not answering your questions. I'm like, oh, something has definitely shifted inside of her. And even Isabel has lied to her once already, telling her about, oh yeah, no, the Frankenstein monster, he's not dead. I saw him in town. Like, he's here. You know, he's resurrected, or like the whole thing that we were talking about earlier on as far as spirit versus ghost. No, he's not a ghost. He's a spirit, even though there was Ghost of Frankenstein, I believe, was one of the Universal films. But yeah, not Spirit of Frankenstein. But yeah, she's then, you know, Anna is obsessed after a while and just like, oh, where does Frankenstein live? Okay, I'm going to go out to this old sheep shed with the two doors, which is very fascinating too. Speaking of doors, to see how Anna almost always goes in one door and then comes out the other. And there's a really good moment towards the end of the film where she goes in and the camera just tracks along the side until she comes out the other door, which I thought was kind of nice. And in that case, you don't see what's inside, and you don't know what she's seeing when she goes in there. And sometimes we get that. Sometimes there are moments where she goes inside of this sheep shed and you don't ever see what's there, but that is also the place where the rebel soldier ends up being at. And really, I find this film absolutely fascinating. The way that Frankenstein comes back over and over again, like, they're in class, and there's the Don Jose dummy thing that is up at the top of the class where people are putting organs on this figurine. You know, it's like a Slim Goodbody type of thing where they're putting in these stomach and lungs and arms, and then she goes up and she puts the eyes on it, which I find to be very fascinating. That's the eyes, and we've been talking about Anna and her big brown eyes and just how she's experiencing things. And then later on, when she meets the soldier, she kind of remakes him too. She brings all of her father's clothes, and either she's making another man or making a new image of her father. And that's how the soldier ends up getting that watch, which plays a crucial part in the film overall because the watch was in the pocket.
I took that as being something like a sense of trust was broken by that prank. It's because beforehand she, relied on her older sister. The whole thing about her calling the spirits by closing her eyes and saying her name is something Isabel told her. But now it's Isabel has broken that. And there is a weird sort of darkness in the way sometimes Isabel looks. The shadows always seem to feel like she's almost lit a little differently. Not in a major, obvious way, but I don't know. There's always just something a little more cruel about her, even before the whole cat thing, which was very traumatizing. I don't know if I've just gotten more sensitive to seeing animals in peril in general, but I feel like the older I get, there's a number of Italian horror movies I have to leave the room. I'm certain, like, seeing it, so like, no. Like, Anna feels betrayed. And so she just retreats within.
Well, one thing I didn't pick up on until the second time I saw it was that Anna's sister says, oh, if it's Frankenstein, it can't be a spirit because spirits don't have bodies. And then she goes, oh no, that's just a disguise. And then then it made sense later as to why you said, Mike, the Don Jose, the putting a mask on it. It keeps making her think this is the spirit of Frankenstein. And then, yeah, like you said, with the soldier appears out of nowhere. And because it's the area where her sister told her the spirit is, or because she believes that he wears a disguise, it's again that possibility of, is this another spirit? So yeah, I was really fascinated by that, all these different phantoms and what they all can potentially represent. And how, again, we don't know how Anna, what she hopes here for to find, but she's curious. I think the ultimate hope, like I said earlier, is some kind of salvation or some kind of healing power, what escapist film perhaps, or even Heather said of finding comfort in horror films. I think that's ultimately the hope, but I was really interested in that. And when you are really curious about something that you can't see, we don't always know why we're so drawn to these things. I'm not sure if she really knows. And even the fact that though this war has just happened, it makes me wonder, what did the children necessarily see in this small town? Or is it just that they are responding off the despair of the parents and that something is just not right? She looks through the photo albums and when they look happy and now they don't smile, they don't talk. It's that confusion, really.
That's another great moment because you see them in that photo album. It's almost like a little mini movie inside of the movie at one point, and you see the parents and they're together and, like you said, very happy. And then you start seeing them in their own individual photos. And I want to say that they might even have their backs turned to each other in those photos, but for sure they are in separate photos because I don't remember who it was, or probably many of the articles that I read talk about how you never see the mother and father framed together. Even when they're there at dinner, and I just rewatched one of the dinner scenes just to make sure that they are just in individual shots. And that even comes to the girls. It is a series of close-ups of these, or medium shots of each one of the family members. Like, you might get some shots with, Anna or Isabel with their mother, or Anna and Isabel with their father, but the mother and father, and that was one thing I wrote in my notes originally, that it was the grandfather, because I didn't realize how much older he looks than the mother, because the mother absolutely,
she's way younger,
knockout gorgeous, much younger. He's old and just interested in his bees right now, and
no wonder she's writing to some other flame.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. They both have their voiceovers, which is great. Like, he's got his notes that he's talking about bees and everything. She's got her letter that she's doing, and you hear her voice, I believe. And when I wrote my notes, I thought, oh, that's her sister that she's writing to. I don't know why I thought that, but then almost everybody else that whose articles I read, they're like, oh no, that's a lover that she's writing to.
Oh, I feel so relieved because when I saw your script, Mike, for this, and I saw sister, and I'm like, oh God, did I misunderstand? Because I even thought with some of the photo album that one of the young gentlemen with her was not the father, but the original flame. I was almost like, is this a lover she had before? Or I don't know. You're never quite sure. And all of our defenses, everything is up to. So it's just, we all could be right. We all could be wrong. That's kind of part of the fun of the journey. And the Frankenstein monster, something that I find most compelling about that is Frankenstein's monster is not the villain of Frankenstein. You could use it as a parable for humanity. He was not asked to be born. He is having to deal obviously against his wishes and wills, the slings and arrows of humanity's misunderstanding. and ignorance and cruelty and judgment. And that's why in the horror community, you see a lot of people that are monster kids that feel othered at a very young age. And that's because you have the inward empathy of, yeah, I can relate to this monster because that's how I'm being treated. Or you see that strain of human intolerance around you in your real world. And obviously, if you're dealing with a small community that's very poor, that has just gone through a terrible civil war and is now dealing with some fascism on top of that, yes, you're seeing a whole lot of cruelty and intolerance around you. Dealing with anything that's fantastical, it's like a promise to you that there's something beyond your little world. You notice how much the nighttime shots, we don't get a lot of them in the movie, but the nighttime shots do look beautiful and magical. The landscape as a whole looks dreary. It looks so dreary. And even when you have those great, like, wide shots of the open landscape, it just looks, God, this is where hope goes to dust. It looks so sad. But the nighttime, everything looks better. The dark and a little bit with the stars and the moon. And this is the dream time. This is where the fantastic can really happen. And that gives you hope. Even if it's misplaced hope, sometimes it still gives you hope.
I noticed that when the soldier was killed and they're talking over his body, and I'm not sure exactly where they brought the body, inside the house or nearby. And it looks exactly like Frankenstein with the scientists around the corpse. And I was like, it must have been intentional, because I thought that was the only sort of a little bit more obvious nod from the things that she's seeing, the train, the mountain, the mushrooms, these things that she's looking at. That was one of the more obvious sort of strong suggestions of that spirit of Frankenstein looming. We know, but that was a real obvious shot. And it's not even her looking. It's just an objective shot. It's not her POV.
Well, there's a lot of very flat shots, and I almost wonder if that is more of a child's POV type of thing, just head on, like when they're shooting like trucks coming into town or any of these things. It feels very like just flat, and like this could be a two-dimensional image. If a child were drawing it, it would look like that, basically. But that scene with the dead body with the soldier there, that might be that same place where they showed Frankenstein, because there's the...
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I don't know in religious practice, and I know that this is probably, people are probably thrown out of windows over things like this, where when does the spirit inhabit the body? And this whole idea, and I know this one was a major fight between factions of churches, which is being born with sin, the original sin. Are you born with sin, or are you born pure? And then when you come to Frankenstein, he wasn't born. He was made. He was sewn together from all of these pieces. Does he have a soul? So this whole idea of like, is he a spirit? Is he a ghost? He's got something inside of him animating him, but he wasn't born of man, And that's also fascinating, that Frankenstein is a female creation. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley writing this, and then to have two female protagonists, because you could say Isabel's a protagonist in this as well, but for sure one female protagonist with Ana. I was like, oh, that's really nice. And she basically is playing that Mary Shelley type role, putting the eyes onto, Don Jose, and, creating the creature, and then going out and then being Maria at the same time. And I love, you get the hand coming towards her from that Frankenstein monster. And I love that Frankenstein is flesh colored too, that he's not green like we see him in posters and things. And I'm like, well, that's interesting, because she maybe saw that poster, but in her mind, she doesn't know. It's a black and white movie, so what does the creature look like? I thought that was a great makeup job. And then, I love that it's kind of a fade out, and then we don't know what happened, but luckily she was okay.
That makeup job was exquisite. If it had looked cartoony or really goony, it would kill something, because this film there's something so pristine about it as a whole and how it's composed. But also something, like going back to the beginning, is Yeah, the whole contrast of getting to see a movie in this village where the village looks like it's 200 plus years old. And I don't mean just like, oh, it's old. It looks like nothing's really been updated. And I'm sure part of that's because of the war, but also they have a town crier. Like there's something like, wow, you really get, wow, this is really the cusp period of time in that century where there are still parts of the country that are basically in some ways very much steeped till the 1800s. But the modern world is creeping in ever so slowly. To me, that's such a fascinating contrast because realistically, that wasn't that long ago. That's less than 100 years from now. So it's just striking to think we live in times where everything is so much more accelerated. But that's why it's cinema, one of the many gifts of cinema is we get to see that bit of history and get reminded of that.
I thought the makeup was really good as well. And the co-writer, just like Angel Fernandez Santos, he was saying that he told Victor, don't actually show Frankenstein because then the audience is going to be like, that's not Karloff. Like, why would the girls see it look even slightly different than in the movie, even if the makeup. So he just thought, just do something to strongly suggest that's Frankenstein. And Victor went ahead and just showed it. But I never thought that. Oh, I just accepted it. Yeah, that's Frankenstein in the movie. I could see why he'd be concerned because what if it doesn't look right or look good? But it looks so good that it didn't ruin anything for me.
Well, yeah, I don't think we've said it explicitly, but this movie is so beautiful, so well framed, so well edited. You know, yes, it moves pretty darn slow to what we're used to, but I think that meditative pacing is very appropriate for this, and it just does keep you with it. Like, I was sucked in the entire time. I just was like, okay, yeah, what's going to happen to these girls? I'm so concerned about this. And what is the story here? You know, what's happening with these letters? You know, all of these questions. Does it answer everything? No. But it leaves me with so many good questions that it makes this movie so compelling. I'm just sitting there going, oh, well, what about this? What about this? And looking for those visual rhymes and looking for those lines that are coming in. Even seeing little things like at one point the mother is, I don't know if she's pretending to sleep or if she is sleeping, but the father comes in and you just see the shadow move across her. And I swear there was a little horror sting, like a little jump scare sting that comes in. I was just like, well, that's interesting. Like the father is almost the creature, you know, the father is almost the antagonist at times in this movie. It feels like, and that really once he has that watch and shows it to Ana, so she's taken the watch from her father, given it accidentally to the soldier. You know, we hear the soldier play the little watch. It's very similar to the watch that Lee Van Cleef had in For a Few Dollars More. It's got the little song that plays. Nobody gets shot at the, well, I guess he does get shot at the end, but a few hours later, yeah. And then the examiner ends up giving it back to the father. Now, the father is probably in mortal terror because how did this rebel get my watch? And now the forces that be are probably suspecting me, and that's the last thing you want in this time of unrest. And so when he shows it to Ana, he's probably got one whole thing going on, and then her with her reaction, talk about that Kuleshov effect, her reaction to it, and just those big frickin' eyes again. She probably thinks that her father fucking killed this guy because she doesn't know. She doesn't hear the whole story.
Yeah, she didn't see it. Which I like that they also shot from such a distance that we only see what she sees mostly. I don't know if this necessarily would fall under like slow experimental cinema in the way, you know, like Chantal Ackerman's films do, because we don't have like, the long duration takes, but it is in that vein. But for me, I compare a film like this to meditating. Like if you focus on your breath, and when your mind, as you both, I'm sure we all know, when your mind trails, you just go back to the breath. Because a film like this can easily just keep putting you in your head because you don't understand the context of everything. That it can just be like, turn it off because this is confusing. And it's natural for people to hate to not know something, not know necessarily what's going on. But for me, you just have to look at the faces, look at the images, and then think about it later. And I really did that on my second viewing, and I was much more emotionally affected as well. And just avoid the head, because it can easily put you in your head.
It mirrors just how life would be like for a child like Anna in that time period, especially. Because I remember I was a little kid in the 80s and in the middle of Arkansas, so it's obviously worlds away. On days, especially where you're left to yourself, like summer days, time just becomes like a draggy. It feels like it's just moving like molasses. And especially in this little village where there's really not much happening because people are more focused on probably trying to feed each other and survive and cope. And so, yeah, time is going to move a lot slower. And I love the fact that we're constantly wondering, because I think that's always a lot of cases where people get frustrated. What does that mean? What does this mean? But I feel like a lot of things happen in real life that we don't know. To me, it's actually a really, within reason, every film depends, but we don't always have answers for life. In fact, we often have no answers for a lot of things in our lives. That's reality. And I feel like this is such a smart film because of that. And also, Anna, I am so hot and cold when it comes to films where children are protagonists, because that can quickly turn into what I call the Kenny syndrome. For anybody that's seen those old Gamera films where the child protagonist is usually named Kenny and he somehow knows everything. He's like, oh, Gamera's doing this because it's like, how do you know, kid? How do you know? Where that's an example of maybe where you're asking questions because it's not because it's, oh, that's like real life. It's more, no, this is bad writing. This is not a good movie. And he's so cloying. And it's not the actor, he's a kid. It's not his fault, but this is the adult's fault in this case. So many adults will have child actors be cloying, and they also treat their child characters like they're idiots. Adults do that in real life too. They just assume like kids are stupid. It's like kids are very smart. They're just still trying to figure out who they are. They're still growing. They might not have the vocabulary, but they know. Kids aren't dumb. And Anna is such a fascinating character, and it's such a great performance. I feel like having this actress, it's interesting that she's become this big professional actress. That's awesome. That it's almost like casting her, it's like a Cassavetes kind of thing. Like you're taking this real person with a very expressive face naturally, and just having her do what she does. Even well into her adult years, call her every once in a while, make sure she's okay, because he's worried about the film robbing her of her childhood. And I'm like, you know what I saw about this director? He just seems like a really good man. He seems like so nice. That's always nice, because there's nothing worse than being like, oh, I love that film. I wonder what this person's up to. And it's, oh no. Also, on a totally superficial note, I want to know how he is living right, because that man's like, what, 87 now? He looks good. And one of the extras, I was like, which actor is that? And then I was like, oh shit, it's a director. Oh my God, how does he look so amazing? Yeah, if you listen to this episode, please reach out to Mike and tell us your secrets.
One of the few films I can actually reach out to the director and try to get it. You know, I was like, I didn't have any luck getting a hold of him, but I'm like, this guy's still active. He's still directing. He just had a movie out last year, and Ana Torrent was in that. I totally agree, because, yeah, he looks so good. Whenever these extras were shot, he just looked amazing. And I'm just like, wow. And even now, like I've seen press conferences from Close Your Eyes when that came out in 2023. And I'm like, yeah, he looks really good. Whatever the Erice diet is, I want it. The extras on the disc, we talked a little bit about this before, I believe. And
I really can't take credit for probably most of what I'm saying, because it was really insightful. And filmmakers don't, because they're the creators, they can't always necessarily comment on their work as well as maybe a really good scholar or critic. But he and the writer too, and even the producer, I was like, wow, they really, everything was so intentional, and they really had a real hold on this content of this story, because there's nothing confusing about what they say about the characters afterwards, or nothing vague. It's like really specific. And I was like, wow, these are great interviews with these great filmmakers.
Yeah, to see so many of the members of the cast after all these years. There's separate interviews with the man that plays the father. And then there's that great one, I think it's called Footprints of a Spirit, where it's kind of a making of, and you get to see Ana Torrent in there, as well as the mother and the father and the filmmaker and the writer. And it just, yeah, it was amazing that they could put this together. The one thing that I have to shout out, and this is a good shout out, for folks that are really interested in film, kind of like we are, if you go into archive.org, there's a whole bunch of introductions and post-film follow-up discussions from CUNTV. That sounds like cunty, but it's not. CUNY TV. There we go. And I'm not a huge fan of the host, but he does a pretty good job. He ums quite a bit, so every time I hear him, I'm editing him in my head. But the discussion that he had with one was a native Spanish person and the other one was a professor, and I don't know if she was a film or what, but the conversation they had afterwards was fantastic. So you get to see the little intro and then they have the post discussion. And I've watched some of those for like Woman in the Dunes and a few other ones, and those discussions are great. Only about 10, 15 minutes long, but it's a nice little supplemental thing as well. I really had hoped that there would be an audio commentary for this disc, but apparently not. I thought I had read that Linda Ehrlich had done an audio commentary.
Not even on the Criterion? There isn't on the disc? I don't know. Yeah, I guess we got to have the disc.
I do have the DVD. It's a 2-disc DVD, and I don't think they've put it out on Blu-ray yet. I could be wrong about that, though. But yeah, all these extras are just fantastic, really well put together. And I don't always say that about Criterion, but this one was a definite home run.
Yeah, I agree. And I really liked what the co-writer said towards the end after they find Anna and she's really shell-shocked from her experience. And the doctor says, oh, she's young and she'll forget. And the writer was saying, I may be interpreting a little bit about what he was saying, but he was talking directly about the war, about how people say, oh, just forget it. It's in the past. We got to move on. He was passionate. No, we don't forget it. We don't forget it. In order for us to move forward, we have to look back. And I'm paraphrasing what he said. That suggests to me what they were getting at there. And I guess they had to be careful because, as they said, this is still under Franco. The censorship is still really strong, and they could have just burned the negative to shreds. So I guess they couldn't be so direct with some of their criticisms towards the dictatorship. But that was one for me. Once he said that, I'm like, he must have been talking about that ending with the doctor saying she'll forget. If we forget, we're just bound to repeat, which we're seeing again and again in this world. Did either of you see the film After Sun a couple of years ago? I loved it as well. And that's about a little girl on vacation with her father, and he's very young. And everything's from her point of view. And there's clearly something wrong with her father, but she can't figure it out. And we only know what she knows. And I was like, after I watched this, I'm like, can't help but wonder if this was an influence, because it is very similar in a lot of ways. So if either of you ever check it out, let me know what you think, because I thought the device is very, very similar.
Dad, I'm so glad you brought that up before we wrap the first part of this up, because I also took that as being like, this is how so many generations treated trauma in general. You don't forget. Nobody forgets being traumatized. Even if they forget the facts, you have that muscle memory of PTSD. But that's why it's important to remember it and confront it and heal, because that way you can prevent future trauma.
You know, I think I just remembered a scene where possibly the mother and father are in it together. It's when, he falls asleep.
Oh, at the end,
right?
That's right.
And she takes care of him, which kind of shows to me that there is still a little bit of love there.
She burns the letter, right? I took it as hope that maybe their relationship will improve. Again, maybe because of the spirit. So it's that looming spirit that Anna is praying for. But the only time you see them, that, and then she calls out to him briefly when she's up on the balcony, and that's it. In that long shot, that's it. Speaking of unforgettable shots, as you both talked about watching this features on the Criterion Channel, and Erice said one of the most important shots he ever made is when Anna is watching Frankenstein, and there's a look on her face where she suddenly gasps when Frankenstein is with the little girl. And he said they approach it like a documentary. That one scene is shot in handheld, and they just put the movie on for the kids. So I don't know what. So they're all watching that movie for the first time for real, like we're watching it like a documentary. So I don't know what he told them, or if he just said, just watch it and I'm just going to film you guys. I don't know if he gave them any specific direction, but yeah, because even when I first saw it and I saw her reaction, I thought, how did they get her to do that? Because it is spontaneous and surprising that I was like, that must have just happened. And it did. And thank God he caught it.
And I rewatched Frankenstein last night just to kind of get myself more in the mood as well. And that really triggered me when I saw all of the villagers with their pitchforks and torches. And I'm like, oh yeah, they have the scene of them in this movie in Spirit of the Beehive where all of the adults or some of the adults are looking for Anna after she runs away. They don't have pitchforks, but they all have their torches and stuff. And I'm just like, oh, okay. It's kind of a nice parallel scene to that. And then you get that amazing shot because we keep seeing Anna looking into this well that's by that sheep shed, and she'll distort her own image and throw in the rocks and stuff. And you get that again later, and you get that shot of her picking up the mushroom or just about to pick up the mushroom. You're like, oh my God, is she going to kill herself? Because that's another thing. Like, she doesn't know shit about the world, and her dad's trying to teach her, like, don't eat these mushrooms. These ones are okay. But this one, like, he literally calls it a demon, which is also what Frankenstein is called in the movie. So you don't know if she's eating this mushroom. You see her by the water. You get the water moving with her reflection, and then Frankenstein's reflection comes up. And I just think that is one of the best shots. Yes.
It's like, is she Frankenstein? Because I've read so many interpretations where a lot of, like, some people seem to think, oh, the dad's Frankenstein or this or that. But it's like, no, she clearly has an affinity. She never acts terrified of Frankenstein. There's not that expected thing where her sister's like, ooh, Frankenstein's in her closet or whatever, something silly like that. Yeah, I love how she could smell the poisonous mushroom. That's it's so cute the way she does that, where she's like, oh, it smells. So they're like, oh, it smells incredible. And her dad's like, don't touch it. That's like, don't eat that.
The way he smashes it.
As you both talked about watching this features on the Criterion Channel, and Erice said one of the most important shots he ever made is when Anna is watching Frankenstein, and there's a look on her face where she suddenly gasps when Frankenstein is with the little girl. And he said they approach it like a documentary. That one scene is shot in handheld, and they just put the movie on for the kids. So I don't know what. So they're all watching that movie for the first time for real, like we're watching it like a documentary. So I don't know what he told them, or if he just said, just watch it and I'm just going to film you guys. I don't know if he gave them any specific direction, but yeah, because even when I first saw it and I saw her reaction, I thought, how did they get her to do that? Because it is spontaneous and surprising that I was like, that must have just happened. And it did. And thank God he caught it.
Yeah, it's so good. And to think, when this movie is set in 40, I mean, it's almost remarkable that this print, like, who knows the provenance of this print that has been dubbed into Spanish and comes over to this little village, has been cut up by the censors, and it's only at this point 9 years old in the world of the story. And just, like, it must have just blown people's minds. I mean, that they had to have that little intro to the movie to be like, don't freak out. This is going to be scary. I love that. And I know that that's just total showmanship and everything, but I just think that that's great. And because rewatching it again last night, I was just like, yeah, I can see where this would really scare the shit out of a little 5-year-old. Cause I think that's how much she's supposed to be in this. I think she was really 7, but I mean, she just looks so young, and those eyes just help because they just look like saucers on her face.
Oh, totally. I loved the showmanship. I wish we could go back to that with film, is like having that bit of the theater with it. It makes everything feel so much more bigger.
Oh, yeah. When he comes out, well, Mr. Lamel didn't want us to put this on without... Yeah, I'm like, okay, nice.
I love it.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after these brief messages.
Bring home a quiet place. Day 1. Buy on digital now. Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn star in the film. Critics say is packed with nail-biting tension and thrills. Included with over 50 minutes of behind-the-scenes footage and deleted scenes. Written and directed by Michael Sarnowski. Available at participating retailers. Buy A Quiet Place. Day 1 on digital today. Rated PG-13. From Paramount Pictures.
All right, we are back, and we were talking about The Spirit of the Beehive. And Robert, you mentioned earlier as far as not knowing other films that are somewhat similar to this, and I was making a little list of stuff. For sure, this had major influence on Guillermo del Toro. I mean, I don't...
Pan's Labyrinth.
Between the devil... Oh, yeah. For sure. Having a female protagonist in Pan's Labyrinth, I think, was very, very smart. I mean, you really get to see the brutality of the war, especially through that father or stepfather character. It's been a little while since I've seen it. I remember loving The Devil's Backbone, and that's all set during the Spanish Civil War as well. The other one that I kept thinking of was Heavenly Creatures, and just that whole world that they create, the two girls create in that, and the way that the way that Ana is fascinated by Frankenstein reminds me of the way that the two girls were fascinated by, both Mario Lanza, but more with Orson Welles from The Third Man, and you get that CGI Orson Welles, like early primitive effects from Weta, but looked amazing. I don't know if they hold up now in 2024, but way back when I saw him in The Creatures, I think I saw that at the theater 3 times.
I haven't seen
that much. Oh, it's so good.
I'm going to put it on my list.
It was one of my favorite Peter Jackson films.
One film this made me think of was Viva la Muerte by Arabal.
Oh, yes, that whole child's point of view thing again.
And obviously, it's a far more brutal and direct film, though it also has a lot of surrealist images, too, because, of course, Arabal, part of the Panic movement with Jodorowsky and Roland Topor. That even like the intro, even though like the art in the intro of Viva la Muerte is like those old kind of really terrifying, like woodcut type art, you have the children singing. And it's, I don't know, it just made me think that like that would be an interesting double bill. I would almost do Viva la Muerte first, though, because this film is so much more gentle. Like you need something a little nicer out of Viva la Muerte. And I say that as somebody who loves Fernando Arrabal and loves that movie.
Well, I'll tell you again, with that opening, with that child sing-songy song, kind of reminds me of Dear Old Dad from Death Game again, but I'm not obsessed with that movie or anything.
It's amazing. No, everybody should be obsessed with Death Game.
I've never seen The Tin Drum, but it feels like this could be possibly related to that as far as like the little boy
that's a
who
German
refuses to grow up.
Is that the what's his name?
Volker Schlorndorff.
Yes. I've been meaning to see that. Same.
Yeah. I might have to kick my own ass to watch that movie because that's one I've never seen. That and one that I want to see it, but I don't want to see it at the same time is fucking Come and See, because I just hear how.
Oh, God, same. No, I saw a video.
I've been avoiding that, even though I want to see it, but I'm not ready. I just can't, but I will.
I love that we're all in the same boat, because I watched a video where this film reviewer was talking about it, and it was a great breakdown, but that traumatized me just seeing this like review. So I do want to see it too, because it looks incredible, and sometimes the best art is the art that to invoke Harlan Ellison, and I love Harlan Ellison. Sometimes it's the art that knocks you on your ass and completely savages you. So I have to tell you, but yeah, I'm with you guys. Like, gosh, sometimes you got to be in a specific. You got to be prepped for that. One film actually, and Mike, I'm going to give you credit because you have it listed, but the minute I saw you invoking this, I'm like, that's brilliant, is The Reflecting Skin. And again, that's a lot darker of a movie, than this one by far. I'd almost put it with Viva la Muerte as far as like trauma, but it's so beautiful at the same time. But it also, you have the child protagonist who's channeling different kind of trauma. Like he lives in a world of trauma too. And the way it's handled is very different in this one, where the horror is more built into on top of the human horror. But I think it would be an interesting companion piece for sure. And that's I think that's also another incredible work in cinema.
You're both giving me a lot to add to my Letterboxd watch list here, because I haven't seen that one either. I'm just looking it up. Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah, it's harrowing, but it's one of those films that it's gorgeous and it will rip you asunder at the same time. That's how I would describe Reflecting Skin. So you may want to have like some Monty Python or something, or Cheech and Chong ready.
A friend of mine described that movie to me just by telling me about the frog scene from near the beginning of the film. That's all I had to hear. And then I said, okay, I have to watch this movie now. There's one other that you might want to add to your list if you haven't seen this one already, Robert, which is Diamonds of the Night, which is two boys who escape from
I've seen that. That's really good.
Concentration camp. Yeah. That's another one where just harrowing and just showing the effects of, because that is one of the things, that we're pulling apart these themes here, is just the effects of war on children and using child protagonists inside of these war films to really show us the futility, the horror, the way that it really does imprint on you, because if you're 25 and in a wartime situation, you're supposed to just blow it off like that, whereas kids might be traumatized. No, of course parents are traumatized as well. Men are traumatized, women are traumatized, innocent victims, and so many of these children are just the innocent victims of all this. So it is an interesting use of children to have them as these protagonists. And then I'll go back to the whole thing of having two female protagonists. I think was great, because you can make it a lot easier on yourself if you just use boys, basically. But with girls, it feels like there's a lot more to it, and it just feels like it's even more harrowing to see these little girls going through this experience. Sometimes, like you said, Heather, you can get a Kenny and you just don't give a shit about a Kenny. Whereas with an Ana, it's just like, oh my God, just looking at this girl is ripping my heart out. And then to see her go through any sort of trauma just makes me, weep.
Of course, again, it helps that this is a beautifully written and well thought out movie. And some of those 70s scammer films are not that. I love my kaiju, but woof. But the minute you get that Kenny, you're like, oh God, no. Like eat him, Gamera. Like it makes you a monster. You end up being the monster because you're hoping that this child gets eaten.
I mean, I know that there's enough talk about children in war films that I believe that, this is just Children in Film by Karen Lurie from Rutgers University Press from 2010. That was pretty remarkable to read her book and just even get more of these childhood trauma things. Because we're not even talking about, we're mostly concentrating on war films. We're not even talking about some of the other childhood trauma things like horror films or any of these other things. Even Little Miss Sunshine was pretty traumatized at a few points.
Which I haven't seen either. I know we might as well call this segment the Letterboxd edition, because I'm like, oh crap, I gotta add to mine.
That's a film I saw when it came out, and I watched it again recently and really enjoyed it.
I got one more movie to recommend, which is Todo La Hero, which I've talked about on the show before, and that's another childhood, like almost everything's through the POV of a kid. In that one, he thinks that his parents aren't really his parents, that he was supposed to end up with this family down the block, and he thinks that those parents are much better, and so he basically hates the kid that is their kid and wants to switch places, if it even means killing that other kid. It's pretty
What's it called? Sorry,
Todo La Hero.
All right.
I know.
On the watch list.
Mike White, you are our Letterboxd guru.
Mike White recommends. Yeah.
Yes,
perfect.
Do it. And then you could put in parentheses, Not that Mike White.
Oh,
Right, exactly. Yeah, I just fill it with like The White Lotus and Chuck and Buck and School of Rock. Yeah.
That'd be
Nacho
such a
Libre.
twist because it's like, oh wow, that's our Mike White. What?
Well, now if you look for me in movie credits, I have started to go. I think it was Josh Johnson thanked me in a movie once, and it was Mike, not Ginger White. So that's my new credit name. Yes.
It's Mr. Fancy over here in some of the films I've been crushing. And
Well, that's because I shell out the big bucks on Kickstarter.
there you go.
hey,
That'll do it.
winning ugly, still winning, baby. It counts.
Got to get those IMDb credits buffed up somehow. So. All right, let's go ahead and take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages. That's right, we'll be back next week with a look at Radio On. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Heather and Robert. So, Heather, what is happening with you, ma'am?
I have recently appeared on 2 different podcasts. I was on the VHUS podcast talking about Devil Doll, or should I say Devil Dolls, because we're talking about the Todd Browning classic with Lionel Barrymore, which is incredible. The 1960s Devil Doll, which was also great. Very different movie, but a lot of fun. And we even talked about the band Devil Doll, not the Hatchet, Ratchet, Rockabilly one, the amazing European one fronted and founded by Mr. Doctor. So definitely check that out. I was also on Dark Habits podcast with the great Spencer and Bradley from Movies from Hell, where we talked about John Waters' Desperate Living. And that was a lot of fun. And we may have also talked about sleep paralysis demons. You just have to listen to it. In the meantime, you could find me over at my website, mondoheather.com. And for links to all sorts of my sundry activities, go to linktree.com/mondoheather.
And Robert, how about yourself?
I'm working on my weekly podcast. It's called Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. That's a YouTube video podcast. So episodes come out on Sunday. Yesterday, I know I mentioned Ackerman earlier. I just dropped an episode on J'ai tout il elle, which was her debut film that I really liked. And I mentioned to Heather earlier and Mike, because Heather does a lot on horror. And unfortunately, horror never works for me. I don't know why. I need more of the horror community on my channel. So I just did Carrie yesterday. So that'll be out on Sunday. And I do a lot of books. I interview a lot of writers who have upcoming books. So I'm currently reading Ferocious Crawford about Joan Crawford by Robert Dance, which I'm really enjoying. And it occurred to me I had only seen maybe 4 or 5 of her movies. So I'm doing like a deep dive into Crawford. And man, she's such a good actor. I knew she was, but seeing more and more, I'm like, wow, she is an incredible actor. So you could check me out at youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I'm on Instagram, same name, at Robert Bellissimo at the movies. Same with Facebook, and the Twitter X/X is a little bit different. It's at RB at the movies, and Blue Sky, I'm also there as well.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.